Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I'm your host, Attorney Henry Gornbein. Please watch us, like us, both the Gracefully Graying website and our Gracefully Graying YouTube channel. Today on Gracefully Graying, we are going to be exploring an important legal area with my guest, Greg Gulick II, who is the General Counsel, Chief Compliance and Privacy Officer at Theoria Medical and 5-Star Telemed, which means he must be doing everything at 5-Star Telemed. Greg, welcome to Gracefully Graying.
Thanks for having me, Henry. I appreciate it.
First of all, why don't you tell us about your background and how you became involved with 5-Star and Theoria?
Sure. Not to go too far back, but I was originally a pre-med student at Michigan State and come to realize that I wasn't very good at science, and med schools want you to be strong at science for some reason.
So law was a fallback.
So law was my fallback option, but I found you could study healthcare law as a particular discipline. And so I went to school specifically to study healthcare law. And fast forward 20 years later, I've been practicing healthcare law and working with healthcare clients my whole career.
Tell us about your current position at Theoria Medical and 5-Star Telemed. I mean, you've got a wonderful title. Tell us what it means.
It's actually 3 separate titles. So as General Counsel, I oversee the legal function. So I do a lot of contract negotiations. I oversee mergers and acquisitions. I do some traditional healthcare legal work, such as avoiding fraud, waste, and abuse laws and things like that. As a chief compliance officer, I oversee our compliance function, and that's a requirement of the government. So any healthcare organization that contracts with CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, has to have a chief compliance officer in place and an effective compliance program. And so I oversee that at Theoria Medical. And then it's very similar with the chief privacy officer role as well, where I oversee our privacy program to make sure that we're properly handling and storing patient information.
With Telemed, is privacy a larger issue? Because, now everything's being done through Zoom. Does that make a difference?
It does. Although with the public health emergencies that have been in place, the rules have been relaxed a little bit. So with video conferencing, one of the things you have to concern yourself about is having an encrypted connection. And you also have to be concerned about being able to share medical information freely during that visit. A lot of the video conferencing platforms, Zoom, Skype, many of the others, Microsoft Teams, they all have a special healthcare platform that can be used, and they meet all the HIPAA encryption standards, and they can be used in telemedicine visits. Now, those rules were relaxed during the public health emergency so that telemedicine could be more easily adopted. But I think once that expires in January, the regular rules will go into place.
Now, there are 2 entities, Theoria and 5-Star. What are the differences between the two?
Good question. So Theoria Medical is a medical group. We employ physicians, physician assistants, and nurse practitioners to go into nursing facilities and skilled nursing facilities and see patients. And so we have a presence in these facilities where our doctors and our providers are rounding on the patients that need the medical attention there. 5-Star Telemed is the telemedicine partner to Theoria Medical, and they focus on telemedicine equipment and also providing telemedicine services to residents in nursing and skilled nursing facilities.
Greg, since March, we've been under an unending pandemic known as COVID-19. What has been the impact of COVID-19 upon both Theoria and 5-Star Telemed?
Well, our utmost concern at Theoria Medical is making sure that the residents in the facilities that we work with, they're known as residents in the facilities, but there are patients. Our key priority is keeping them safe. And so, our providers have to work with the facilities to make sure that they're being tested regularly. They're not entering the facility if they're feeling sick or anything like that. So it's been a real important challenge to try and keep COVID out of those facilities. Now, telemedicine has helped quite a bit. So our telemedicine function has allowed us to still see patients remotely.
Tell us about the structure and goals of both Theoria and 5-Star Telemed.
It's the same goals. It's to improve healthcare for patients in post-acute settings. And so post-acute settings would be patients that are discharged from the hospital, but still need some level of care. And it could be care delivered at a skilled nursing facility. It could even be care delivered in the home setting. Theoria Medical's been working on a lot of projects to try and get patients better care within their home settings so they don't have to go out and see doctors. And with COVID being, what it is, that's a huge benefit.
What does Chief Compliance and Privacy Officer mean, Greg?
Well, in a perfect world, to be honest with you, the General Counsel really shouldn't be the Chief Compliance Officer, because the Chief Compliance Officer's responsibilities are to make sure that every part of the company is following the laws, following the proper policies, procedures, doing things the right way. And so the Chief Compliance Officer is a real important role in making sure that all government regulations are being followed.
Now, telemedicine, I think personally that the impact of COVID-19, if anything, is going to increase the need for and the growth of that aspect of your company. What is your opinion with regard to that and where it's going, especially since we're under a pandemic and more, I know in the legal community, the courts are using Zoom video all the time, and in many respects, that's going to become the new norm even after we're out of this pandemic.
I've said before that if there's one good thing to come out of this pandemic, it's that telemedicine has been recognized as being an effective way of delivering care. I've studied telemedicine for 20 years now. Telemedicine's not brand new. It's been around for a long time. It's just now that technology and payment have kind of caught up with each other. So now the government is reimbursing for telemedicine visits. And to be honest with you, it's bringing costs down across the board.
Well, you think it's a huge time saver, and because, all you do is turn on your Zoom or other video, and the patient or the assisted care facility has theirs, and you're on, and you're not driving, you're not walking, you're there. So a lot of it makes tremendous sense. So you said you've been working with it for 20 years. So tell us a little bit more about the history of that.
If we want to talk history, we could be on here all day. That's one of my favorite topics. Even just looking at telehealth, and all telemedicine is and all telehealth is just using telecommunications techniques and technologies to connect patients with caregivers. So if you think back even to the medieval days when bubonic plague was everywhere, they used to burn bonfires in villages, and those bonfires would tell patients and people, stay away from the village, it's been contaminated. That's a form of telehealth because it's using bonfires to communicate information. Now, fast forward to computers and video conferencing, and we even have 5-Star Telemed has developed like telemedicine peripheral devices. So the doctor can be at a remote location and still see what they need to see on the patient. whether it's down the throat, images in the ear, nose, heart rate, blood pressure. The doctor gets all that data and they can diagnose and manage a patient in a lot of ways. So it's really interesting stuff.
I have a question because in the legal arena, as far as the trial, they've done some mock trials and they're finding that you lose a certain three-dimensional aspect with Zoom that you don't have in person. Does that impact upon a telemedicine at all?
A little bit. So telemedicine's never going to be the replacement for that in-person visit. New patient visits, the doctor really needs to be there with the patient. You need to have that face-to-face, hands-on type of visit. But for a lot of other things, follow-up visits, management of a chronic condition, or in instances where a face-to-face visit isn't possible, a lot of the studies have found that telemedicine fills those gaps really nicely. Quality is just about the same, and in some cases it's improved. In certain specialties like telepsychiatry, for some reason, it's telemedicine's the better approach in a lot of ways. So a lot of research is being done on this, and we're finding that it still meets the standard of care in a lot of ways.
You brought up a good point. One of our sponsors is a major clinic in Rochester, and they do everything by Zoom. And the Zoom capability has enabled them to really see patients all over the state. So the same thing would work with telemedicine in your area where, you can assist patients not only anywhere in the state, literally anywhere in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, of course, the legal aspects come into play there. So even among states, the doctor has to be licensed in the state where the patient's located. So if I'm the doctor and you're a patient in Indiana, I have to be licensed in Indiana for us to still consult.
Well, do you have any doctors who are licensed out of state, or is everything strictly in Michigan right now?
No, we actually do business in Michigan, Ohio, and we're actually looking at expanding to other states. But part of my job as general counsel is making sure our docs get licensed in the states where they'll be seeing patients.
What about privacy issues? Has telemedicine impacted upon that? Because, when you're a person, you're there, it's the two of you, or the two of you and a nurse or an assistant. But with telemedicine, it's virtual, so anyone could be, looking at us hypothetically.
Well, I know physicians, especially I know with 5-Star Med, and I know even with other telemedicine programs, the caregivers, the providers, the mid-level providers still treat it as a real visit as it is. So they still take protections and precautions to be in a private room. They still take the privacy aspect seriously. From the patient's perspective, it's up to the patient to decide who sits in on their visit. So if they have people walking in the background, presumably they're okay with it.
Are there any legal issues that are different with telemedicine than traditional medicine from your perspective?
I've studied that very question for many years now. And it's interesting. Every 6 months or so, I check to see if there's ever been a medical malpractice case published having to do with like a telemedicine visit. And I have not found one yet that has to do with a patient suing a doctor because they didn't feel they got the proper care. Now, of course, the standard of care, there is no special standard of care for a telemedicine visit. So the doctor has to be the judge, or the caregiver has to be the judge of what they can and cannot diagnose. And I've seen visits where the doctor can't quite diagnose the patient, and so we'll encourage the patient to have a follow-up in either an urgent care or a doctor's office.
Well, that would cover it, because as long as you're urging follow-up or second opinion, then legally, you're meeting the standard of care. So That should be the answer. How does telemedicine impact upon patients? What is the reaction that you're getting?
And that's a really good question because, and to be honest with you, from what I've studied of it and been involved with it, there haven't been that many studies that have looked at it from the patient's perspective. The few studies I've seen and the experiences of, Theoria Medical's patients has been largely positive. And in fact, with Theoria Medical, I haven't seen a single negative from a patient that feels like they've been, shortchanged or not given services. The key is, at least with Theoria Medical, we have caregivers on site. And so it's really a tool for the nurse practitioner or physician assistant to get instant feedback from a doctor for a patient that might need it at, say, midnight when there aren't any doctors, roaming the halls. So it provides kind of that 24-hour, 7-day-a-week care, and it supplements the care.
What about the impact on doctors? I mean, obviously the doctors you're using are into it, but do you get any resistance from doctors, or what are you finding overall?
The doctors that we work with that do our telemedicine love it. They have everything they need at their fingertips. So Theoria Medical and 5-Star Telemed have been real innovative in being able to capture data, use data, and have data available to the doctors so they can see everything. So it's even actually better in a lot of cases than being in front of the patient, because you get to see some historic data, you get to see the current data, and so you have a little bit more information in front of you. So it's actually been a very favorable experience.
And the same question, what is the impact upon the treatment centers, assisted living facilities, and those who are really the focal point of what you're doing?
For them, it's been, I'm speaking for them.
Okay.
but I think it's been very positive because, again, they have doctor coverage 24 hours a day. And before, they would have a medical director that might be there a few hours, every day or a few days a week. Now they have this full-time coverage. So if there is an emergency or if there is a urgent matter, they can always jump on the computer and consult with the doctor.
I mean, there's a huge convenience factor. The doctor can literally be practicing from home with telemedicine.
They could be practicing from a beach in Maui.
That's true.
But yeah, it's very convenient for the doctors. And as I said before, Theoria Medical and 5-Star Telemed are really working to use the data that we get, and we get a lot of different patient data. We're trying to use that to really improve the care experience. And so that even gets us into kind of artificial intelligence and things like that.
Greg, are there any difficulties created by telemedicine versus the traditional in-person consultation and treatment?
It depends what you're using telemedicine for. So, obviously like orthopedic work, where the patient's got a broken arm. There's obviously a limitation, although scientists are working on, robotic arms that'll be able to feel and handle patients and offer that sensory experience remotely. For the time being, the doctor would have to be on site. But for other types of care, follow-up care, some of the work we do with skilled nursing facilities, it's really it's monitoring and managing patients. And for those uses, it's really useful. So it's not a tool for every instance, but it can offer a lot of help.
I was thinking, what about physical therapy? Because that's follow-up. That's done in a lot of assisted living facilities. And I know a lot of that can be done virtually by Zoom as well.
You're absolutely right. You wouldn't think something like that would be, but we're finding the more we use telemedicine, the more it's even more useful than we expected. And so I don't think at this point, I don't think we're doing a lot of that in the rehabilitation space, but there's no reason why we couldn't.
We already discussed the fact that malpractice, it is what it is, and so far you haven't seen anything, which is a good thing. And, I guess as long as the standard of care is met, that's the key. And if in doubt, you make a referral. What do you see as the future of telemedicine? I mean, we have it now where in many respects, there's no choice. People are homebound or bound in assisted living facilities, memory care units, et cetera. And that's not going to change for the foreseeable future. I mean, the studio was supposed to reopen in October. It hasn't. And for the foreseeable future, everything we're doing is by Zoom. So what do you see as the future of telemedicine?
I think the future of telemedicine and just healthcare in general it's very exciting to look at. So I think we're seeing success stories with just telemedicine, which is just using video conferencing to connect patient and doctor. Eventually we're going to have all kinds of devices that, I can sit in my home and, use the device to allow the doctor to see things, to, take heart rates, to measure skin alkalination that tells the doctor, am I at risk for, diabetes or whatever. So there's going to be a lot more care delivered from the home setting. And I think also there's going to be more personalized medicine. I mentioned artificial intelligence real briefly. That's just using individualized patient data to help kind of predict what might be needed. So based on, say, my medical history, an artificial intelligence algorithm can go through, pull different risk factors, and predict what services I might need. And we're starting to try and use that to predict what services our clients and our patients need in skilled nursing facilities.
Well, how do you do this? I mean, is it based upon building more and more of a database, or how is this being done?
Both. You need a good database. And so electronic health records have helped a lot in that regard. But it's really about trying to use the data. So it's identifying that, for instance, one of the things we keep an eye on is return to hospital rates. If the patient gets discharged into a skilled nursing facility, we want to make sure the care they're getting there is sufficient. We don't want them to have to return to the hospital. And there's risk factors associated with that. So it's to our benefit and the patient's benefit to be able to track those risk factors. And we pull that from the electronic health record, and we can calculate these risk factors and keep an eye on them. So if a patient's discharged to a skilled nursing facility with congestive heart failure, that's a risk factor for return to hospital. And so those are things we pull the data, keep an eye on, and then we can follow up on and keep an eye on those particular risk factors. So it's making care more efficient in a lot of ways.
When the pandemic ends, which no one knows when, I mean, it looks like
soon.
Yeah, exactly. Do you see this becoming the new norm, or do you see things reverting in any respect to some of the more traditional modes for practicing?
One of the big obstacles has been reimbursement. And so CMS has prior to the pandemic, CMS had not really embraced telemedicine. But I think with the pandemic, they've enhanced reimbursement rates, which encourages a lot of doctors to get into it. Doctors don't want to do something if they're not going to get paid for it.
Sure.
No one will. But, I think the government's realized that this is a real benefit. This is a real tool. And I think, at least I have my fingers crossed, they'll maintain the reimbursement rates. And I think patients have bought into it already. We've seen uptakes in direct-to-consumer telemedicine, and, we've seen success stories with our patients. So, I think with a little luck, telemedicine will be here to stay.
Are there cost savings in telemedicine versus traditional medicine?
Some of the studies I've seen on it, it's been either about the same as a traditional visit, but other studies that have taken into account savings associated with traveling, with taking time away from work to see a doctor, waiting time in doctor's offices, things like that. If you take everything into account, it's less expensive to do a telemedicine visit. It's more convenient, and the cost of the visit itself is usually a little bit lower.
Greg, are there any other key issues that we haven't covered that you think our viewers would find interesting or that we should be aware of?
I think the key issue is, especially during a pandemic, is we can't ignore our health. Just because we're expected to kind of stay home and try and avoid gatherings and stuff, we want to make sure we're still seeing the doctor as needed. Whether it be a telemedicine visit or even going to the doctor's office, they've structured their offices now so it's much safer. So I think, I would encourage, your viewers, keep up on your healthcare, keep up on your exercising. It's pandemic's no excuse to sit home and not take care of your health.
You're right. What do you find most rewarding about your work?
What I find most rewarding, especially working with Theoria Medical, they're so patient-centered and they're so innovative. They want to improve the health of this patient population. And so they've done so many different things to, improve the care, making sure that, nurse practitioners and physician assistants are more involved in care, adding telemedicine as an added service, just really trying to change and improve care and, just the lifestyles of people living in these nursing facilities and skilled nursing facilities. So just being part of that team makes my job very enjoyable. Any
frustrations?
Only that there's not enough hours in the day.
We're down to a minute. What are some final words you'd like to share with our viewers before we sign off, Greg?
Again, just take care of your health and, try telemedicine. I think the more patients that use it, the more they'll be impressed with it. And I think telemedicine is a great way to keep up on your health. So
it's like the future is here in many respects.
Absolutely. And that's exciting. I think it's good for all of us.
No, this is interesting. It impacts upon so many of our viewers, and it's a growing area. And Greg Gulick, we're running out of time, so I want to thank you so much for being my guest on Gracefully Graying. I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying, and I want to again remind our viewers and those who go to Gracefully Graying to like us, to share, and to also visit us on the Gracefully Graying YouTube channel. Again, Greg, I want to thank you so much for being my guest on Gracefully Graying.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day now.
Thank you. You too.